سيداتي سادتي، رحبوا معنا بمدير الجلسة من CNN العالمية جون ديفتيريوس وضيوفه الكرام.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our moderator, CNN Monitor Emerging Markets Editor for CNN, John Defterios, and his panel.
Let's give a nice warm welcome to the expert panelists that we have here, because we have that beautiful graphics. Shukran, it's nice to be back in the kingdom. I think this is my 12th visit to Saudi Arabia, stretching back to the mid-1990s, and to have an initiative of this grandeur from His Royal Highness Mohammed bin Salman. As inquiring minds, as journalists, of course, we always wonder what's behind a brand. So immediately asked when I got off the plane last night, what is Misk all about? And the person who was handling logistics for the forum suggested, oh, it's in a slightly broken English. He said it's all about perfume or oud. So for those that live in the region, as you know, one of the things we like to take away are some of the traditions and customs of the GCC in particular, me being based in the UAE in Abu Dhabi. And it's nice to have those scents when you go into a modulus or you go to a special invitation to a personal house. It's something we'll take away from our memories in the region, having been here for 6 years and having covered the region for the last 20 years. But I'm not here to talk to you about olfactory senses, but actually two major themes this morning, and that is transformation and trends. I've been watching very closely, as well as my colleagues here in the Middle East, of the National Transformation Plan. It is very ambitious. We've moved into a new environment when oil is not $100 a barrel or $115 as it was in June 2014, but hovering between $40 and $50 a barrel. So the timing to launch the transformation and actually pass it through the Parliament on 6/6/2016 is extraordinary. It is ambitious. We're looking at 450,000 jobs in the interim stage of 2020. To bring unemployment down to 7%, reduce the debt, and raise the role of the private sector initially at 40%, but to do much more in the future. It's a trend we're seeing throughout the Gulf states and the oil producers and into the broader region as well. We'll bring this one trend up in the panel this morning. It is a crisis of youth unemployment, not something that's touched the kingdom as deeply, but what is the right education for the future as well? How do you prepare the workers of the future for explosive growth and this level of privatization? You have a kind of tiny IPO coming up in 2018, $2 trillion for Saudi Aramco. That's just one of many things that are taking place, and I'd love to get the sense from our panel today. So I'm going to touch on some trends, but one of the trends I think we have to watch out for is the balance between globalization and populism. We saw it, of course, in the US election with Donald Trump taking the White House. We saw the same thing with the Brexit vote last summer. And even if you think about it, the Colombia peace deal in Latin America was rejected because it didn't have the pulse of the people. So in this move by His Royal Highness to transform the economy for the next 14 years, how do you balance the need to open up your economy and balance the need of the street at the same time, the populist urges that we've been seeing emerging, not here in the kingdom, but of course outside as well. And I think a good place for us to start is with His Excellency Jose Manuel Barroso, the former President of the European Commission at Goldman Sachs. Jose, you mentioned to me that you're specifically here more in your previous role than the current one today. And we talked backstage about this trend that we are seeing, the populist trend. And you remember Bill Clinton and Tony Blair talked about a third way to balance globalization and still have a softer touch. Is that being destroyed today because of the populist urges, that trend of populism that's emerging because people are unhappy on the street, at least in the OECD countries?
Yes, I think the trends has been accelerating and indeed aggravating. So it's more difficult today. And there are two major triggers for this populistic trends that sometimes are also, let's put it clear, nationalistic, chauvinistic, even xenophobic. And the reason is the financial crisis, the outcome of the financial crisis, the ripple effects, and the perception in many parts of our societies that inequality is growing. And so the perception of a bigger cleavage between the man in the streets and the elites, specifically the political elites, but not only political elites, financial elites, the elites in general, including the academia, the experts, the media. So there is, in fact, a growing dissatisfaction. And there was also in Europe the issue of the refugees and illegal migrants that is putting to the limit the tolerance of some of our societies that have not yet shown capability to integrate so many foreigners. So it's the old question that we know in European history of the conflict between hospitality and hostility. Which way are we going to deal with people that have a different culture, a different language, sometimes a different religion? And so all these facts are pressing to the limit our systems, and the traditional parties, the so-called mainstream parties, from the center left to the center right, have not yet been able to articulate consistent policies, and that's why, for instance, we see today people that traditionally vote in the left, in France, for instance, ready to vote to the far, far right, or what happened recently in the United States, where, according to the best information we have, a significant part of the working class, white people from the working class, went to vote Republican that traditionally was not their vote. At the same time, in the center-right in Europe, for instance, there is not yet a consistent, clear response to the issue of migration, and so more and more support has been given to nationalistic forces. I think this is indeed a danger. By the way, we have been saying that for decades now. Now it's confirmed. But personally, I've mentioned this already at least 20 years ago, when it was obvious that globalization, if there is not some kind of political response to it, cannot solve all our problems. I'm in favor of the opportunities opened by globalization, namely in terms of knowledge. Today, thanks to globalization, we can have access to knowledge that before it was impossible. The world today, generally speaking, is better than 20 years ago. If you look at all the socio-economic indicators, from child mortality to longevity, the world is better. But at the same time, there is a terrible malaise or angst in our societies. People are anxious because they feel that nobody is in control, that the traditional mechanisms of authority are also not sufficiently credible. And we are going to live through this turbulence for some time more.
I want to circle back with you about the solution to that and how it applies to the kingdom as you open up the economy more, push for privatization, and try to enhance the role of the private sector. But it gives me a nice segue to Jacques Atelier. I read one of your pieces that was suggesting that the clash of civilizations, and particularly having attacks within the major cities of Europe over the last 2 years, is severe and something that's long-lasting. And in fact, you suggested that the clash of civilizations is going to make World War II look like a water balloon flight. I mean, do you feel that the dialogue between the Middle East and Europe, or the Muslim community and the West, can find a common ground as economies transform and open up here? They're not closed off to the outside world.
I'm not pessimistic at all. I don't think there is a clash of civilization. I think there is certainly a risk of a third round of wars. I say third round because we face the same kind of situation at the end of the 18th century and at the beginning of the 20th century, where we had twice a period of 30 years of war following and triggered by nationalism and by the fear of opening nations. And it's clear that there is a danger of a third wave of wars, world war, triggered by nationalism, and that Manuel has explained, which is still a very high probability. In order to face that, we don't have to only understand it, but we have to fight. And the most important thing is to fight against it openly. For instance, let's look at the most important figures of tomorrow and let's look at what must be done. The most important figures of the next 15 years is demography and technology. In the next 15 years, 1-5, the world will have 1 billion people more on Earth. Out of this 1 billion, 600 will be from Africa. This is the most important change, African countries. The second most important change will be the fact that technology are going to appear with a huge amount of new transformation that will help a lot to improve the quality of life for many, many people in many, many dimensions. In front of that, people are afraid of it, and we must try to make a clear distinctions about the reason why they are afraid and try to explain. And it's the role of the so-called political elite, which is not an elite. I make a clear distinctions between the real elites, which are the people who create something, academics, CEOs, workers, artists, and the ruling class, which is not always an elite. If we look at Europe, I don't think that there is a real risk of conflict of civilization. If we look at what happened with the different communities that are in Europe, they are very well integrated. It's a myth. There is no clash. If you look even at the question of migrants, what is the problem? We are 500 million inhabitants in Europe, and we have got last year 1.5 millions, which is peanuts compared to the number of migrants, to number of inhabitants.
You say there's not a challenge, and the numbers are correct.
Of course.
You say it's not a challenge, but people on the ground aren't happy. They're not happy with the European Commission, this trend that it's not listening to the people on the ground. So you can paper over it, but the reality is it's quite different.
Yes, but the answer to that is either you shrink, you reduce, you go to populism and you accept the evolution, or you go beyond that and you say, for instance, as far as Europe, let's have a project for the next 20 years. Let's say, what can be Europe in the next 20 years? For instance, let's take the best of what happened. For instance, let's take the best of what happened with the US. The US has decided to spend less in defending Europe. Good news. That means that we Europeans, we have to take care of our own future. And by the way, yesterday, there was a meeting of Ministers of Foreign Affairs in Europe who decided, at last, to begin to organize the defense of Europe as a whole to face this challenge. And then I think that Europe, if you look at the figures, may be a more united part of the world in the next 50 years or 30 years because of a withdrawal or beginning of withdrawal of the Americans. It's a very important potential challenge for the future.
Sorry, I want to bring up, if I can have you wrap up so I can bring in the others.
Yes.
Thank you.
And second, in terms of relations between communities, it's not true. Of course, there are some acts, barbarian acts, but not true. There is no clash of civilization between the different communities in Europe. Not true at all. People are living very well together. Don't create that nightmare that you cannot go into some streets in London or Paris. This is not true. Europe is a very, very peaceful part of the world, maybe the most peaceful part of the world. The different communities, the different religions want very well together. We make a lot of profit from different communities to integrate, and they integrate, and the attacks are just details. We have to fight against that and not to surrender.
Okay. I'm going to circle back with you as well, but I mean, you'd have to admit, Austria, Hungary, Macedonia, they're not interested in that roadmap you just laid out for us, so think about it and I'll come back. This is a great time to bring up a corporate voice into trends. And then after this, I want to drill into the trends of the future and what you're watching as well. How do you trend spot, if you will, spot trends that are vital to a company like Thales, which is in electronics and defense, aerospace, satellite facilities, and the rest, when there is a case of constant chaos? I don't think we've seen so much change in a period of 5 years, Patrice. How do you make sure you can keep your eye on the ball and even apply it here to the privatization that's underway when the chaos is constantly churning and changing? How do you manage the company in that sort of environment?
Well, if I had a magic recipe, I would tell you from scratch. Of course, that's quite a difficult task to anticipate and try to identify trends that will impact typically a group like Thales. To summarize, try to be concise, I've identified at least 4 types of trends which are quite important for a group like Thales. The first one is economic trends. It's obvious. A group like Thales is pretty much exposed to the international markets. Typically, 20% of our business is done here in the Middle East. Only 1/4 is in France. Only 1/2 of it is done in Europe. The rest of our international exposure is outside Europe. The second trend, which is pretty important, is geopolitical ones, of course, because of the nature of our business, because we are involved in defense, is many sovereignty challenges, space, for instance, security, and so on and so forth. The third one, which is vital for Thales, is technological trends. Why so? A group like Thales is a high-tech group. We invest 3 billion euro in R&D innovation per year. We have 22,000 people working in engineering. We have also 1 Nobel Prize, which is quite not very often the case for an industrial group. So understanding genuine technological evolutions, try to anticipate technological rupture or breakthroughs are also vital for Thales. And the last one is cultural trends. It's a bit surprising because we're not a B2C company. However, we are a human capital intensive company. What makes Thales successful is our human capital. So we need to attract and retain best available talent in the world, in particular young talent. And these young talent have clearly different aspirations, the so-called millenniums, the Y generation and the Z generation coming next. We need to understand their deepest wishes, aspirations, to be able to attract them and to retain within a group like Thales.
Thanks very much. This is a natural transition to you because you're the representative of youth within the UN Secretary General's office. There's a couple of things I want to talk to you about, but the aspirations, because you spend most of your time concentrated in the Middle East and North Africa, the aspirations of the Saudi youth, we got a flavor from it, for it in the first panel today, but in the broader region of about 350 million consumers, we have a youth unemployment rate that's kind of knocking on the door of 30% all the time. So this is a crisis, one that needs to be dealt with. We see what's happening here in the kingdom. I know you have a report coming up. Give us a taste about whether we're moving the needle and bringing down that rate of youth unemployment with some of the highest birth rates in the world.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, John. I think let me bring the conversation here to the region and talk about some of the findings of the Arab Human Development Report. Now, as you rightly said, I work in youth issues. I'm concerned with their situations, with their aspirations, and try to project their future in this region and elsewhere in the world. Now, in the Arab Human Development Report that is coming out just in 2 weeks' time, I will be sharing with you some of the findings. I'll let the numbers speak to themselves and just for us to better understand the trends we have today. This region today, in 2016, has the highest number of young people in its history, over 100 million youth. This region in 2016, and all Arabs, I'm an Arab, I'm from Jordan, all Arabs are only 5% of the global population. Last year, we were half of the world's refugees. Young people in this region today, when I look to the global average of youth unemployment, is 13%. Youth unemployment in the Arab region is at 30%, even higher than double the global average. We expect that this region needs to create 60 million jobs by the year 2020. And we expect that, looking to if the past could tell us anything about the future, in the next 10 years, 3 out of every 4 Arabs will be living in a conflict zone or a country that qualifies to be fragile. Now, in that same report, we look to different indicators in employment and education and other areas. Now, nobody can deny that the region has made significant gains and advances when it comes to education, and mainly enrollment to education. But the question of the quality of education is still very much debatable. And that's very much relevant to the situation of the labor market. Now, if I could continue, on the issue of youth unemployment, and you asked about it, John, 2/3 of Arab women, Arab young women, who are looking for jobs, actively looking for jobs, are unemployed, and with no immediate prospects for a better future there. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, I'm sorry, but I think we need to inform the discussion and put a bit of framing for the situation of Arab youth. Now, let me bring you one striking figures of this report. Do you know for the 22 Arab countries, the mobility of Arab youth is the lowest among all other regions? For a young Arab to travel to the 22 Arab countries, he or she would need, in average, 18 visas. And that doesn't exist anywhere in the world now. Now, in the same region, it's a very rich region with resources, very rich region with the talents of its people. We just heard the stories of four young Saudis who are really reflecting the face of this generation of young people in the Arab region. Although the trend is to focus on all the counter-violent extremism narrative and all the threats that could be posed by young generation that might be marginalized, but I think we are constantly reminded by some good trends coming from the region, by young people in this region who are so desperate for a better future, they're ready to help, they're eager to help, and they make mechanisms to do that. Now, when I look to some of the other indicators in that report, particularly when it comes to youth and political participation, this region has the highest rate of youth protests if you compare it to all other regions in the world. In fact, it's amazing to note that although the average age in this region is way below 25 years of age, the average age of politicians is 58 years old. And in many parts of the world, you still have to be over 30 years old in order for you to stand for office or to run for parliament. Let me conclude there by saying, this region is all about contradictions today. It's a region that has some of the worst and the most alarming development indicators in the world, but it's the same region that has the same potential for finding the solutions from within. On that note, I really have to acknowledge the Misk Forum and the Misk as an initiative, because what I struggle with, to tell you the truth, as the envoy in youth at the United Nations, what I struggle with the most is bringing some good news from this region. And today we are seeing some good news coming from the region, because I'm so convinced there's no solutions could be brought from the UN or from international organizations. Maybe we need the support of everyone, but the solutions in this region exist in this region. And all what we need is for the youth and for governments in this region to reclaim the ownership of their destiny and their fate. And one reflection about the word shabab. In fact, even the word shabab, unfortunately, in this region and other places in the world, is always being referred to as a problem or being referred to as a liability in their countries, even to the point that the terrorist organization in Somalia called themselves shabab. And I think when I visited Somalia, I was telling them it's time for our youth in the region to reclaim the word shabab one more time and to show the world who are the real shabab of this country. I think the examples we hear this morning from Saudi youth, the examples that exist in this room, are the real shabab of this region. Our job to make sure that we don't fail the largest generation of young people in the history of this region. And we have what it takes to do that.
Obviously, you're speaking to an audience that loves to hear it because they want the opportunity. One more follow-up, and just a little bit quicker in terms of your response here. These actions by not just Saudi Arabia, but throughout the region, we've been talking about reforms since 2005, and now it's knocking on the door of 2017. It is too late. No way you're going to get the 60 million jobs by 2020. So we just inch along, or do we actually start to make headway over the next 4 or 5 years when national transformation plans start to pay dividends here, do you think?
That's a great question. Let me take the analogy of His Royal Highness that was put in the Vision 2030 of His Royal Highness Mohammed bin Salman. When you talk, you need to depart from oil and the oil dependency in this region. You know, when I look to youth in this region, I think of it, this region was gifted in the 20th century with the oil to help these economies to transform the economies, the infrastructure, etc. When I look to the 21st century, and always in the spirit of talking about the trends in this region, The only oil I could see, the biggest asset this region has today, is the fact you have 100 million youth that will make or break the future of this region. I think, but contrary to the oil, you can't keep it underground. At the end of the day, you have to do something about it. They will do something about lack of investments here. So it's right, I don't project that we will have 60 million jobs created by the year 2020, but what we could put in place, an enabling environment for the youth in this region that includes a legal framework that is conducive, looking at them as opportunity, that when it comes to small businesses would not tax them from day one or not make their life, I would say, a mission impossible for them to start a new business. I always say, like, we keep telling young people that governments will not create jobs for you, but at the same time, if they start to decide to start a new business, it's almost a mission impossible. They can't register a company, they will be taxed from day one, there are complications all the way along. At the same time, you have serious problems in accessing credit. I think the best we can do in the year 2016 is to take a deep breath and reflect on the current situation in this region and just know what we, or do what we know for facts that will pay results a few years down the road. Ecosystem that's supporting to small businesses, a true environment that would trust young people of this region as an asset, not as a liability, as peace builders, not the troublemakers, as the future of this region, not a liability in the development of this region. And most importantly there, you need really to listen to this generation. They're already talking. I mean, when you look why they don't vote, why they don't show in political processes, it's hardly that you can buy the argument that young people are not interested in politics. They are not interested in government, maybe, in political processes, but they are interested in politics and they are interested in public life. In fact, go to social media, and we are in a country, in fact, that I'm always amazed by Saudi youth in Twitter, Snapchat, Instagram, in all these areas. We have the highest number of users in all these accounts. And this is a generation that is so willing to contribute. I think Vision 2030, Vision of the United Nations, as you see, the Sustainable Development Goals up there on the screen, also the 2030, offers to all of us an opportunity. And yesterday I was talking to a colleague here and talking about projecting what jobs we need in the future. In the Sustainable Development Goals, there are 230 indicators, offer you 230 ideas for the jobs we need in the next 15 years.
Great, okay. I want to have you guys, gentlemen, play off of each other, and some of the, a couple of Uber themes I want to bring up, or Uber trends. You wrote, Jacques Atelier, a very provocative piece suggesting that the U.S. Empire, if you will, the U.S. Superpower role will probably fade by 2035. And I'm wondering if this is what this election was about, number one. And number two, you're suggesting that it won't be Russia or China or India sharing that power, or the European Union, but in fact a dozen countries kind of vying for their own sense of power, regional superiority. That is a severe trend. Do you think actually it's going to play out as you're suggesting? And we'll get His Excellency Jose Manuel Barroso to follow up on that.
Well,
Try to keep this tight because I'd like the others to jump in. And one housekeeping thing, I want to take some questions from both sides of the floor here, so if we can get the microphones out to the floor. Please, Jacques.
Well, what I explain is that the situation is very dangerous because the market is stronger than governments. And since 25 years, I've explained that the real danger is to have globalization of markets without globalization of rule of law. For a moment, it was hidden by the fact that the Americans, first the Americans and the Soviets, were creating a kind of quasi-world rule of law. Soviets get down, and now the Americans were supposed to be the lasting world rule of law, which is not true anymore, mainly because the Americans are withdrawing and because also the Americans are relatively weaker. I wouldn't say in absolute terms, but in relative terms, weaker. Therefore, the real danger is that no one is in charge of a global rule of law of the world. And this is a real danger. It's why the climate change agreement is so fundamental, because it's an example of the fact that we can have, on some issues, a global rule of law. And if this climate change agreement fails, it will be a very bad signal for the future.
Yes.
And it's why also it's so important to see different parts of the world organize itself. The US as part of the power. Europe should be stronger in order to organize and to be part of a global power. And the rest of the world should also organize in order to create the conditions of a new world order where the different group of nations will play a role, and not to let the power to the big companies It's important for the companies to develop, but it's important also to have a rule of law to balance it. I will also insist on two facts which are very important. Number one, education, education, education. Fundamental. Mainly for this region, education. Not only to say it, but also to look at what is in the textbooks, what is really taught, and who is teaching. It's why the new technologies on MOOCs is so important, because people are going to look at the...
Can I interrupt you for just a second? You say that, and I completely agree. The European model is much more egalitarian than what we find in the United States. But as a result of the 2008, 9, and 10 financial crisis, the 1% has never been wealthier, and the class system that's being set up in the United States and other developed countries has never been stronger. Let's be honest. Private schools are more expensive than they've ever been, private universities. And we could talk about it on the stage, and I know the effort to try to educate this population for the jobs of the future, but the reality is very different. That's why you see a Donald Trump in office.
Yeah,
the populist zeal is they're not responding to the person on the street.
That means why the so-called political elite is responsible of his own defeat.
Yes.
Because they didn't pay enough attention to the working class, to the poor, to the children of the other part of the country and the other part of the fence. That's why it's so important, and in France we are proud to have a very, very sophisticated education system and social protection system that demonstrate that France is one of the most egalitarian systems. Not perfect, far from that, but where we really succeed in that. But it's very important to think that education, primary education of each and every child, primary education, boy and girls, of each child is so fundamental. And whatever is taught is also fundamental. And second, what has just been said is so fundamental, because I do believe that we can create 60 million jobs in 5 years. It's not difficult, for two reasons. One, in many countries, there is no unemployment allowances, and when people work, whatever they do, they have a job. Even if it's a poor job, they have a job. And second, if you develop what we call microfinance, micro-entreprise, micro-entrepreneurship, if you let that things flourish, you will have thousands, millions of entrepreneurs. And this is fundamental. I'm sure that can be done. Education and small business as the key for the future.
It's been stressed here. I don't think Ahmed would argue with you. I'm going to come back to you, Patrice, but first a question for His Excellency. I'm a little bit worried that Humpty Dumpty can stay together in the European Union. 28 going down to 27. You see, nobody would have dreamt that we would see the UK. This is an Uber trend, that the architecture that was built in the 1990s, as you know, it seems to be unraveling. In fact, I was shocked at comments from President Juncker, the person who sits in the seat that you used to have, when Prime Minister Renzi of Italy said, we can't live with this austerity. We can't live with the number of refugees because other countries have shut. And Mr. Juncker told him, we don't want to hear from you. Can you really have an apparatus that's far away from both another leader but the people going forward? Doesn't it need to respond to the challenge today?
This problem of different opinions between, let's say, population or people and leaders, it's not only in the European Union, as we have seen. It's a more general trend. The trend that was, in fact, confirmed by the recent events in the United States and also by the Brexit vote in the United Kingdom. The issue that we should ask ourselves is the following. Is globalization going to stay, or are we going to see the stop of globalization? It's a matter of judgment. From my point of view, globalization is here to stay. There are some setbacks, but those setbacks are against the tendance lourde, the heavier, the stronger trend will be for globalization. Why? Because globalization is technological and science-driven. It's not by politicians. What is happening today in the world of artificial intelligence, in robotics, in digital agenda, it's amazing. The world is being transformed radically. The way we are going to live 20 or 50 years from now is completely different from what we are living today. And I have no doubt that's going to happen. Now, at the same time, there is a reaction, but there is a reaction because there is movement. I mean, what happened in the United States is a reaction to a movement. By the way, it's very interesting to look at the votes of young people. There is a clear generational gap in the United States, the youngest people voted against Trump in general. In Brexit, also, the majority of young people clearly voted for the United Kingdom to remain in the European Union. So there is a generation gap here, where there is a reaction to what is perceived by many people as a too fast globalization. Of course, there are matters of concern, now in terms of trade. We are seeing the slowdown of trade globally. Some of the proposals of the new American president are clearly in the negative sense from a trade perspective. Nevertheless, I continue to think that the stronger trend will be for globalization. Now, what happens is that the traditional parties and political forces have not yet been able to incorporate these messages and translate the concerns of a big part of our societies. Yes, as you said, in social terms, because of the impact of the financial crisis, and also in some cases in Europe because of movements of people that in some countries we were not used to. And that's why some of our big progress is at risk. What you said, it's amazing that some young Arabs in this region, they need 18 visas to travel. In Europe, in most part of Europe, not only they don't need visas, they don't even need passports. It was a Schengen agreement. Now it's under threat. So what we have achieved in Europe to have a complete freedom of movement among young people, and not only young people, everybody can go from another country without any kind of limitation. Practically there are no borders. From Portugal and Spain or France and Italy or Italy and Germany, there are simply no borders. But now, because of terrorism, this is being put in question. So, and this is a very important fight. Who is going to win that global fight? It has to do also with the geopolitical trends you've mentioned. I think from my point of view, there are still two major powers in the world today organized. The United States, they remain the most important power in defense terms and in technological terms. And China is certainly becoming the real challenger. Europe, it depends on the capacity of Europeans to act together, because Europe is still the biggest economy, it's certainly the most important trade bloc in the world. So it depends on the European capacity to act together if the Europeans want to play a real role in this global geopolitical game. And there are other players. There is Russia that wants to remind ourselves that it exists still. It's using the only thing where they are strong, it's in military terms, because they have been declining in all aspects, in economic aspects. There is a clear decline of Russia, but there is one matter where still they are strong. It's in military terms. That's why they attacked in Crimea, and now they are in Syria, and nobody is taking them out of them there, because they are strong in military terms, and it was a mistake. President Obama saying that Russia is a regional power. It's not just a regional power. And we have, of course, a very interesting thing, is the Arab or the Muslim world. What role does the Arab and Muslim world want to play in these global developments? I believe it will be great to play the role of modernization, to give more opportunity to his people, to the men and women of this great area and these great countries that have such a hold and important civilization. I hope that the Muslim and the Arab world will be contributing to further modernization and will not hear the voices of those that want to bring us to the dark ages of nationalism, xenophobia, chauvinism, and sometimes racism. Because we have seen in the past where ultranationalism gives us, leads us. We saw what happened in Europe last century, and I believe it was not good, neither for Europe nor for the world.
Okay. Patrice, I'm going to ask you one more question and then go to the floor. Can we have some hands up for some questions so we can get the microphones? We have a couple here. Do you want to give it to this gentleman here in the third row? And then another one there in about the 10th row. We have a microphone here. Just a second. So Patrice, we're covering geopolitics, populism, climate change challenges, youth unemployment challenges. Probably going to say, what were you doing here delving on the trends that worry us the most? But we have to be aware of them. There's no doubt about it. What are you most excited about in terms of technology? Because I mentioned you work in satellite technology, you work in defense, aerospace, television technology, and airplanes. We've seen the explosion of social media. We saw the panelists this morning talking about their projects. Succinctly, what are you most excited about in the next generation? Is it artificial intelligence, as the former president was suggesting? Or from your even corporate perspective, what are you most excited about?
Well, probably the most, one of the most exciting topic is clearly the digital transformation that is coming, that has already, that exists already, and even if we are not a B2C company, this digital transformation will affect our markets, our businesses. And for that, I'm looking very precisely at, I would say, 3 or 4 main core technologies to master this digital transformation, which are connectivity, as you have mentioned. Everything is connected. Nowadays, people speak about Internet of Things. We speak simply about connectivity. The second very important core technology, which is fascinating, is big data analytics, and artificial intelligence. Deep learning, machine learning will play a greater role in the future, even in defense or security systems, not only here again in the B2C world. And last but not least, to make this digital world, I would say, real up and running, we need to master cyber threats. So cybersecurity and all the underlying technologies related to cybersecurity is something which is really fascinating for a company like Thales.
Okay. We know what influence it had on the US elections, perhaps coming from Russia. Okay, let's go to the floor. I would ask the questions to be very succinct, and I would ask the answers to be succinct because we have about 12 minutes, yeah? Very good. Please, nice to see you. You want to stand up for us? Introduce yourself and then just direct the question to somebody on the panel. Thanks. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hayat Sindi. I do wear, I won't say many hats, but I do wear my scarves. I am part of the Shura Council here in Saudi Arabia. I do sit in a scientific advisory board to the General Secretary of the United Nations. I'm also one of the 10-member group who are set up to facilitate science and technology for SDG goals at the United Nations. Thank you very much, gentlemen, and welcome here to Saudi Arabia. Globalization, artificial intelligence, I do agree with you. Artificial intelligence is going to take us by far because the technology become very cheap. We understand now about the mechanical and electrical part of it. But my question to you, though globalization is, as you said, that is important and is really making our world smaller, but a lot of women really lost their career, and sometimes they're very hard for them to find a focus in career. Artificial intelligence as well. How are we going to empower women to be in the direction of science? Because they are really missing the empathy, the passion of women scientists to direct the direction of science. Because if you have more women to direct science, we'll have no nuclear weapon, we'll have no laser killer beam, we won't have fast cars. Another thing, how are we going to invest in a global family? We talk about globalization. Global family is the next economy. How are we going to invest in a family so the next generation won't have any fear to choose a career and to start a family and to be part of this world?
Thank you. Ahmed, do you want to jump in? I think, who wants to take it? Jacques and Ahmed? Why don't you start, Ahmed, about getting, this is the effort of youth, but how do you get more women in the workforce? I need a minute answer, and then Mr. Atale will follow up. Question 2 is over here. Please.
Yeah, I think it's right. I mean, there are two crucial things. First, for our generation and the youngers, the millennials and the youngers, technology is not a new thing. It's basically they're embracing it. They are innovating already, and you will see maybe throughout the forum how much young people are embracing technologies and innovation, and they are embedding them in their businesses, small businesses, and they are finding ways to basically achieve their aspirations and find jobs for themselves and for others. But the other point is extremely important. I'm a firm believer that for our region to achieve its true potential, young women and girls of this region have to be fully empowered to be part and full economic players, and for them to really contribute to their own development and to the economies. There are many good signs. I think sometimes in the middle of this, what I call it sometimes in this region as a free fall, we have to celebrate anything that works. And we have to find the cracks of hopes, and we have to work with that. For example, right next to you, there's a good friend, Her Excellency Shaimat Mazrui, who is the Minister of Youth in the United Arab Emirates. She is 22 years old. Sorry for saying your age, but That's a good example of really showing the power. Just give an opportunity for a young person, give opportunity for young women and girls in this region, and you will see wonders. I'm a firm believer that bringing more young women and girls to really, contribute to the development of our region is key, but this also is the way forward.
Okay, Mr. Atali, yours for a minute, and then we'll come to Patrice.
Well, it's everywhere a difficult issue. Everywhere in the world, women are not in a fair place, and that could be better through education, and unfortunately through quotas. It's also important to get the feeling that women have got the right place, and that is through a very willing policy saying women should have a role, and then that means that you should have a certain numbers of women in the boards, certain numbers of women in the parliaments, certain numbers of women in the different organizations. As you said, education is fundamental, and I'm told that it's already the case that in the engineers' schools in these regions, the women are a majority, which means it's good for the future. Just a grain of salt to say that, unfortunately, when women are in power, they are not different from men. And you have very tough women which do not certainly play a weaker role in terms of weapons or whatever kind of policy we have seen in the past everywhere in the world. But I do believe that mankind is losing half of his potential by not using the total potential of women, and that is good not only for women, and what has to be explained, but it is good for men to give a largest position to women. Men have a lot to gain from women wealth and mind.
Yeah, in fact, you use the example of the UAE. It's a nice round of applause for that. Patrice, how do you recruit women into the sciences? As a second half of her question here. I'm trying to get my 13-year-old daughter into the same space. She loves chemistry. Are you recruiting aggressively, setting up training programs? Just quickly, if you can.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to jump in on this question. This one is very important for me because I'm a great believer of what diversity could bring to a company like Thales. Innovation is at the core of what we do, and if we want to innovate more and more, we need to bring more and more diverse perspectives, different approaches, and this comes with diversity, be it gender diversity, but be it diversity of nationality, diversity of background, of education, of age. And so all these forms of diversity are very important. I've taken strong commitments at corporate level to increase, in particular, gender diversity. We are starting from a low level of, I would say, women within Thales, but it's quite comparable to, I would say, many engineering groups in the world. And I have clearly decided to double the percentage of women within a time frame of the next 5 to 6 years. It will take a bit of time. But it leads also to the question of education. How do we motivate young people, young women, to join or to be interested in these engineering matters, in these science and technological fields? That's clearly also a question for political leaders and head of states.
Okay, thanks very much. We'll go quicker here. Question 2. Please direct it to one person on the panel, if you can, please. Please.
My name is Mohammed Al-Jasser. I'm Managing Director for Inma Technologies, which is a technology company in Saudi Arabia. I'm also Chairman of Nominating Committee for Eisenhower Fellowship, which is a global leadership development program focusing on young leaders. My question is to Mr. Hindawi. The challenges in Saudi Arabia and the region are vast. Therefore, Saudi Arabia and other countries in the region look for partners. So what practical projects have you created or will you create to empower the youth in Saudi Arabia and other regional countries? Thank you.
Good. That's for you.
Sure.
Is that correct for Ahmed? This is interesting because this is a country that partners with everybody. In fairness, with the Thales, with the GE, with the Siemens. I mean, time and time again. There's no shortage of JVs in this country in the private sector. Very quickly, Ahmed, your input.
Very quickly, what we have been trying to do, I can list a lot of projects, you can go to the website, but more importantly is trying to work with what we call the national youth policies, putting a policy that is basically trying to invest in young people in any given country. The United Nations have supported almost all the national youth policies throughout the region and will continue to do so. But one of the trends, and we have been really struggling with that, is shifting from development work to humanitarian work. The more you do in humanitarian, the less you can do in development. And you see this trend throughout the region. We have to focus in Syria and many other places on the humanitarian response. And that's really, I mean, drain the resources, drain the capacity over what's supposed to be a good policy, a youth development policy that helps the country to invest in its youth. So if you check out, you'll find like we were among the supporters for most national youth policies, almost in half of the Arab countries. I could go in numbers to tell you that in 2010 we had 11 national youth policies in 22 countries. Now we have less that number, and we have more shifting, as I said, to humanitarian work. Looking forward, my hope that in the coming future we will be able to forge partnership that not only talking about the public-private partnerships, but the very important role of a national youth policy or strategy that is adopted by the government, because the question of youth cannot be dealt with one single ministry, whether that's the Ministry of Education or the Ministry of Labor or the Ministry of Youth. You need a cross-sectorial approach, and that's where our expertise we can bring it to the table. So this is an offer to any representative of government here. If you are really on embarking on a national youth policy that brings together a statement to coordinate the work of all ministries and different parties and investing in youth, the United Nations is here to support.
Okay, very good. I don't want to speak for Patrice, so I'm going to do a quick question, but yeah, about 90% or more of your staff in Saudi Arabia are locals. Emiratization is alive and well in the UAE, so this trend's going to continue, and that's why the training is going to be very important. Final quick question, and perfect, direct it to one person, please. Thanks for your help. It's got to be quick because we're almost out of time. We have the microphone up for
Assalamu alaikum. Good
Thank
morning,
you.
everyone, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and thank you, Misk, for putting this great event together. My name is Khalid Ramlas, and I will ask a quick question, as you told me, and I will direct it to Ahmed. We know that there is a negative image portrayed about Arab and Muslims in general. How do you see the role of media in shaping this future and changing this image and reflect the real positive image? We are not in lack of ambitious people. We are not lack of positive events and people in the region. So what do you think is our role to help in portraying the right image in Western media? And where is the role of leaders and Western media in that? Thank you.
It's funny that question came up because in Marketplace Middle East, we devote some time to covering the Muslim market of 1.6 billion consumers. So the Western companies that ignored are making a big mistake because it's growing fast, as you know. How about the image of this big population that's going to cross the 2 billion mark? Ahmed?
You know, he speaks to the frustration of many young people in the region. We are just sick and tired of playing defense. We have to defend ourselves. If we succeed in a small business, well, look, things work in the region, as if it's like a miracle almost for a young person in this region to work. I mean, this is a generation that is already doing things in the ground. They are already succeeding, and for them, they don't want to make success an exception. Success has to be the rule in this region. The destiny of our generation is not only to be portrayed as a threat to security or a potential terrorist or sinking in the Mediterranean or a refugee or unemployed or just basically a liability in his country. That's not a destiny for any young person in the world. And the trouble for us, I mean, coming from this region, that you have to do twice the work to prove that your success is not an exception. It's basically, there are many fellow Arabs. I mean, I remember in everything I was celebrating in my life and other young entrepreneurs, we always feature them as a wow, coming against all odds. I think the odds of this region should be favoring young people to succeed. So I think in controlling the message there, my hope that we will not play defense all the time, but rather will be more proactive. And my message to all young people here, like, listen, guys, I mean, for all of you, أصدقائي وإخواني العرب الموجودين هون وشباب هذه المنطقة, this is our region. We just cannot gamble with its future. We have to reclaim it, and we really have to be that generation that goes to rebound this region from its current free fall. I feel responsible. I don't want to be here like when I'm 60, 70 years old and pass on just failures and sorries and regrets to the next generation. We have the responsibility of rebounding this region from its current free fall. We are responsible for that, for ourselves, for this region, and for the future generations. And I think this is for me why this forum is very important. And if there's something out of this forum, I really hope that we can counter not only the negative narrative, but we can bring some hope in a region that is so desperate for some.
Good. I think it's worth a note that CNN and some of the other major broadcasters are here covering it as well. So we're opening our eyes to the potential. We need to settle down the region, but it's a very fast-growing population with a lot of consumer power for the future. One housekeeping note, sit in your seats because there's not a break. We go straight to the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of BP. I'm sorry I couldn't get your question. I've got double zeros. I got the time. We're all out. Nice round of applause for the panel today.